Let me make this clear right from the start. This video is my personal opinion. You don't have to agree with it. If you think Boneworks update looks great, I'm really happy for you, genuinely. There's new content coming and plenty for you to be excited for. But with that out of the way, I do ask you at least hear me out and where my pain points are coming from, as my last video was more of an initial reaction, while this one will explain things better and in more detail. First of all, let's explain how some of these things actually work. The amount of replies I saw from people being just confidently wrong and not understanding what Marrow actually is was kind of insane, and I feel that might be my fault for not explaining it better in previous videos. Marrow is not a game engine. It's an interaction system made for Unity, the actual game engine. It does not require these two games to look the same. Marrow is not a collection of models and an art style. A Marrow game can look nothing like Bonelab. A Marrow game doesn't really exist since it's sort of just an internal tool for SLZ, but I'm using that to better convey what I'm trying to say. And for further clarification, here's Swipes to further explain this, as he knows a lot more about how this stuff works than I do, and he can explain it better than I can.
In Unity, games are able to choose from standard, high definition, and universal render pipelines. Bonelab makes use of a modified URP rendering pipeline, while Boneworks use the standard pipeline with shaders made by Valve for their The Lab demo. Besides that, there's also the Unity version difference, which would modify the light baking procedure across the different titles, Boneworks being on Unity 2018 and Bonelab being on Unity 2021. As of recently, the games have reached both Unity version and rendering pipeline parity, both using SLZ's modified URP fork. This has led people to believe that it's mandatory for both games to now look identical, including the fact that they both utilize the Marrow 2 interaction engine. This is not the case, or at the very least, they are not related to each other. What the actual problem is a decision to not specialize both games to use anything unique. If the argument is, they must look the same because of circumstances surrounding both games, this is not true. In the case of the mod parody video Brandon posted, it is significantly more understandable that both games look more similar to each other than they would otherwise, given the fact that embedded shaders in an asset bundle, the crate, are used when they are extracted and instantiated. Including the fact that they share light maps with each other, this gives even more of an impression that they both look the same. Even including these facts, there is still no explicit reason for them to look exactly identical. In the case of what they do have manual control over, they have the ability to modify their URP fork per game, including different shader variants made specifically for a game like Boneworks. This, in the case of loaded mods with their own shaders, wouldn't affect that much, but visual style is more than just surface shaders. Stuff in the post-processing step, like significantly harsher ambient occlusion as seen in Boneworks, the bloom as shown in Bonelab, color grading and correction differences, and the ambient fog that is added to levels, are things that do not explicitly relate to how a surface is behaving, but still significantly contribute to the overall image. There is no obligation to have things like this be practically identical across both games. These are dynamically done and do not rely on compiled constants, but as shown in the video, the post-processing is identical, or at least not discernible in a way where you can reliably tell what game you're looking at. This is still giving SLZ the benefit of the doubt in the case that they do actually have different shaders made for Boneworks to closer emulate the original style and surface behavior. Although, looking at the small segment of the main menu level shown at the beginning of the video, it looks closer to Bonelab's standard Litmus shader than it does to Valve's VR standard shader used in Boneworks. This is a question of effort. Of course they can have mod parity, but they have also shown that they draw the line at any potential modifications specific to their own game. The Ford avatar, for example, doesn't look at all modified from the Bonelab one, model, shading, and texturing included. This Ford is not a mod. It's part of Boneworks, not loaded in dynamically from Bonelab or the common Marrow crate that the other objects in the scene pull from, but it remains unchanged. Going a step further, they could have made variants per game for specific items that can still have parity in terms of what item they are, but not how they look. Like a map spawning a spawn gun. In Boneworks, it could be the Boneworks spawn gun, and in Bonelab, it could be the Bonelab spawn gun, which look very different from each other. This can extend to all items that they want to retain a specific visual for, but they chose not to. There is no explicit reason for the Boneworks and Bonelab null bodies to look exactly the same. Stylistically, Boneworks null bodies did not look like Bonelab null bodies already, and although the change was for performance reasons, the even newer null-body change didn't have to come to both games. It could have been a small differentiator to tell the games apart, but everything is now identical. There's also the potential of a more dynamic solution, which could replace Marrow SDK shaders at runtime with their specific game or even platform equivalent. This is incredibly unlikely, and is a lot more effort, but it's certainly not impossible. It's not like the game couldn't use a dynamic shader replacement system already. There are instances where entire materials are swapped between Quest and PC platforms, manually, across many official and modded maps. Even besides specific shader replacements, material replacements with Unity's addressable system does still work. They could just have materials from the games be something you, as a modder, could pull from, where the game has their own specific implementation of a certain material. This is simplifying the problem, as there are many things that would need to be solved with a system like this. Brandon has even mentioned the possibility of something like this being in the Marrow SDK, where you can grab meshes or materials from the games themselves and use them in your own maps. All of this is to say, there is definitely no obligation to have them look the same. Game development is all about problems and solutions. Saying, well, that's just how it has to be, is a fundamental misunderstanding of how development works. It's like if they showed the next SLZ game, and it had the exact same NPC behavior as the previous two, and people said, well, it has to be that way because the NPCs use Puppet Master. The statements are vaguely related, and don't actually address the fact that there was no effort put in to improve NPCs. Just because they chose to do a certain thing, it doesn't mean that was the only option. It just means out of all the other more effort options, they chose to take the path of least resistance.
So no, just because they are both built off of Marrow doesn't mean they need to look the same. Now let's talk about another thing that people have said about the art style. I've seen a lot of people chime in saying it's the same mod, so it should look the same. You're right. The two mods, the levels themselves, should look the same. Here's the thing though, my art style complaints aren't with this mod level. I'm not complaining about the way the light bake is or anything like that. When talking about this art style, I'm completely ignoring the level itself, the mod level shown entirely, and only focusing on the spawnables in it, as the way Marrow's SDK works is with a system called spawnable placers. This means if someone makes a mod level and puts an already existing item in the game, they can save on storage by using a spawnable placer, which will place the item using the version already in the game. Because of this, we can pretty safely assume things like these NPCs, the guns, these boxes, and pretty much any other object that can be moved will look exactly like this in Boneworks' campaign as well. Not the floor, not the walls, not the baked lighting, but for simplicity's sake, we'll say anything that can be moved. That's not necessarily entirely true always. There's a lot of custom objects that can be made, etc. But for the context of this video, it makes things easier to explain in this specific instance, since it doesn't seem they're using any custom objects at all. So this box here that looks old, grungy, and generally pretty dirty from Boneworks now looks like the Power Wash Simulator crew came in for a cleanup, and now it looks like this. It's much cleaner, much less grungy overall, and it's a lot brighter. Here's this big stone wall. In Boneworks, grungy, dirty, old, dark. Now this fucker is glistening. It still looks dirty generally, but it's much brighter in comparison and generally doesn't look very similar to its old counterpart at all. And these aren't one-off things. The whole entire game looks brighter. Here's the main menu before, here's after. This wall is super bright now. It's the most obvious example I can give you, but everything here looks super bright. Here's Central Station before, here's after. Cartoonishly blue rain particles, which at first I didn't think would be a problem, but now seeing a more full picture with this updated tweet, looking back at the old stuff, I'm starting to see it a lot more. And yes, I'm aware spectator cam can have this effect to make things look brighter, but you can still tell generally, based off of this wall, I still think is a great example of this, that things are actually brighter as well. Spectator cam for sure isn't helping here, but you can still very clearly tell this game is brighter. Zero question. Now let me get something clear. Change isn't bad. I'm not upset that they're making changes to how Boneworks looks. I'm not some super, it needs to look just like it did. I'm upset that they're making Boneworks look like Bone Lab in specific. Boneworks has an art style that is much more realistic. You can't just change that. It's a part of the game's soul in a way. I'm not upset that it's a more brighter game. I'm upset that this dark game is suddenly turning into a more brighter game. The best example I can give you is if you take Mario Galaxy and replace the overall style with Mario 3D World. It's graphically better technically, but this isn't Mario Galaxy anymore. This just looks like Mario 3D World. Even if the levels are the same and it's technically the same game, a big core aspect of what made Galaxy so special is now gone. You can tastefully make changes to things. Look at Resident Evil 4 and its remake. They look much different, but the dark tone and overall vibe remains intact. That blue color wave remains tastefully, faithfully, and still retained while looking completely different. If SLZ did a visual overhaul and made a much different looking game than Bone Lab and tastefully kept Boneworks' realistic and grungy style, I wouldn't have complaints, I'd have praise. It's not that I hate change. This is straight up just not Boneworks anymore. It's essentially a Bone Lab mod at its core and it looks exactly like one. And again, using Marrow does not mean it needed to be this way. Look at Lakatraz's Duck Season port to Bone Lab. This looks nothing like Bone Lab. This looks like Duck Season. The custom objects and other things really bring it to life, and the only thing that looks like Bone Lab is that player model. But the custom items are from Duck Season and they look unique and they stand out correctly. Boneworks has a style like this too, much different to Bone Lab. Just because they're similar in game and have similar weapons doesn't mean they needed to look the same, and they never did. And some of these things may seem trivial, I'm sure, and I get that. So what if this one gun looks just like the Bone Lab one? So what if this one box looks just like the Bone Lab one? Is that really a big deal? No. In one-off situations, it's not a big deal. But the problem is that it looks like everything is getting this treatment. It's not one thing that's disheartening, it's a million little things everywhere. They changed this usually yellow crate to be the blue Bone Lab one. And what that tells me is that the rest of the game was probably given this same treatment. Every small little detail not in Bone Lab will probably just be replaced with the closest Bone Lab counterpart instead of actually respecting that Boneworks is different and giving it the proper unique look and items that it deserves. If this was Labworks or a Bone Lab mod, this would actually be a good thing. It would save on file space, not having unique items for everything. But this is a different game. They could have changed things like the Eater to look more like it once did, while still keeping mod parity and saving storage. It would just look different across the two games, which I believe is a great thing and exactly what should have been done here. You can't just change things like this, it doesn't look right. It was never meant to look like this and it never did. There are real-life, live-action cutscenes, which work in Boneworks because the game is a more realistic art style. Now that we're more cartoony like Bone Lab, it's not going to fit in as well as it once did. It's not that a cartoony style is bad. I love how Bone Lab looks, but I don't want Boneworks to look like that too. Bone Lab looks good because its levels and setting is built around its style. Monogon Motorway is a big giant green wonderland, and there's levels like that all throughout the game. But Boneworks almost exclusively tries to look much more grounded and generally saves big wacky stuff for the end as sort of a big finale. And even then, it doesn't go that crazy. These null bodies aren't the Boneworks null bodies either. Who the fuck are these? And for the love of God, don't tell me the Boneworks null bodies aren't optimized enough. They may not be optimized enough for low-end quest hardware. That is true. But have we forgotten that they are updating a PC game? That was one of the big portions of what Boneworks was. PC players are essentially getting a visual downgrade for Quest users. I understand wanting a more optimized game. I'm not complaining about any of the other optimizations. Boneworks runs like shit. Right now it runs terribly. But the NPC look was a very unique, standout thing that should have been given everything they could do to at least retain that original style. It now looks like they're more focused on retaining the Bone Lab style more than anything. Just because it looks a bit more like the Boneworks one doesn't fix the problem that it still looks much more like the Bone Lab one than anything else. I really do think the NPCs in both games should look different. They don't need to look the same across both games. Having this parity is not necessary for mod parity. They can look different while also being functionally the same. Speaking of functionality, unfortunately, this Bone Labification seems to also mean the player will be the same as the Bone Lab player. This is not good in the context of Boneworks. This we don't know for sure, but based off everything else, it's a pretty safe assumption and there's not really any reason to believe otherwise. Everyone seems to mutually agree we're probably getting the Bone Labified player in Boneworks. It appears we're going to have the same rig in Boneworks that we do in Bone Lab. Boneworks was built around the limitations of that player. Here's a puzzle in Streets where, without any exploits, you'd need to bring a crate over to make this jump. In Labworks, with the Bone Lab player, you can just jump up normally due to the greatly increased jump height of Bone Lab. This is just one example, but there are plenty of similar scenarios. Another negative of using the same rig as the Bone Lab player is that the gun recoil is just as bad as it has been since Bone Lab's launch. This looks like an animation. It used to kick your whole hand back. Now it just flicks the gun up a little bit. So even if you're not one to care about the visuals all too much and you don't mind the more cartoony feeling look, the actual gameplay is seemingly affected in a negative way as well. And some people told me, well, they can always update it. But this is the same studio that goes silent for years and left patch 3 as a beta branch for Bone Lab for essentially an entire year, while the default version of Bone Lab was still incredibly buggy and plagued with issues like grip glitch. They lost that benefit of the doubt when they spat in our faces twice now. That's a privilege you're given, and once you lose it, you have to earn it back. Delaying patch 4 last second in December, saying nothing for eons right now, setting a goal to release stuff this year then missing it and only bringing it back up in December is not how you earn it back. I don't have a lot of faith in them updating and fixing problems because they haven't done that for the past 3 years, and I feel like that's a completely fair stance to have. It's just pattern recognition. And it's not that they haven't fixed anything, it's that a lot of things have gone unfixed. They for sure have fixed some problems. But regardless, a lot of major things remain. But even outside of that, this should never launch like this in the first place. Are we serious, guys? Are we okay with it launching in a state we all agree isn't right? Shouldn't games come out as intended in the first place? Is this not the goal? Am I missing something? Look, this is depressing. I don't want to sit here and complain. I want to be excited. I don't want to sit here and tell you this sucks, you should hate it. If you don't care how it looks, if you don't mind the gameplay changes, if you think this is awesome, that's great. I'm happy for you. I really am. This video isn't to say you're wrong for liking this. It's to help you understand why I and many others don't. So hopefully, even if you disagree, you can understand and respect our thoughts on it too. I want you to know this isn't some rage bait. I love Bone Lab. I love Boneworks. I'd hope that be obvious from my hundreds of videos, and my complaints aren't because I hate everything SLZ. It's because I'm genuinely disheartened seeing one of my favorite games of all time transform into something it isn't. Boneworks has such a special place in my heart. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and to see it turn into just another Bone Lab thing is painful to me because I loved Boneworks, and a big part of that love was how it presented itself. I don't think this update is all bad. Bringing this excellent game to more people is awesome, and modernizing it is incredible too. But I just wish it was done differently. It could have been done differently, but it just feels as if SLZ didn't give it the love it deserved. We don't even have the old null bodies, something I figured we all agreed was a requirement. And for what? For Quest? Why not make it look different on PC? It has the power to handle it. Boneworks is a game that showed everyone why PC VR is so special, why it's important to have powerful hardware, and what you can do with that powerful hardware that can't be done on other systems. Now we're seemingly making changes for everyone across the board to support low-end systems, which goes against exactly what Boneworks originally stood for. This doesn't mean I don't want optimization, but there's a limit to that. There's so many little quirks of Boneworks that make Boneworks special and unique. But now it's just like Bone Lab and it will feel exactly the same. If this is what it costs to get mod parity, then I wish it never happened. I really wish I could be more positive. When SLZ does right, I mention and express my joy. Look back at any news video covering the Boneworks update. I'm excited, I'm thrilled, and explaining how it's all awesome. I didn't want to come here and make a sad video, but these were worries I expressed beforehand as well. This isn't a new thing. In my video talking about 10 things I felt the Boneworks update needed, I explicitly mentioned the NPCs and player stats right off the bat as super important things. I didn't even mention the art style because I figured that was a given. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to feel the same way I do. You can look at this new Boneworks update with excitement and get all excited you want. All I ask is that when you see that I'm personally disheartened by something, you at least hear me out, and regardless of whether you agree or not, I ask that you respect that I don't feel the same way and understand I'm not trying to upset people. This really is how I feel about this. If you're not upset by it and you're super excited, I'm happy for you. Big things are coming. But for me, I've got a lot to worry about, as a very personal game to me is being changed in a way I feel loses its original soul and takes out a giant part of what I originally fell in love with.